I stood at my father's graveside, rain soaking through my black suit, when a woman in designer clothes approached, with 3 children trailing behind her. She placed a manicured hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Alan, honey, we need to talk about your father's will." My blood froze. It was my mother, Patricia, the woman who walked out on Christmas morning 15 years ago, when I was 10, leaving only a note saying she needed to find herself. Now she wanted half of everything my father built. The memory hit me like a freight train as I stared at her perfectly styled blonde hair and expensive coat. December 25th, 2008. I was 10 years old, racing downstairs to open Christmas presents, my heart bursting with excitement. Dad had worked overtime for weeks to buy me that remote control helicopter I'd been begging for. But instead of gifts under the tree, I found a single piece of paper with Mom's handwriting. "I need to find myself. Take care of Alan. I'm sorry." That morning destroyed my father. Frank Miller was the strongest man I knew. 6 feet, 2 inches of solid muscle from 20 years in construction. But he crumbled like a demolished building. He spent the next 3 days calling everyone Mom knew, driving to her sister's house in Ohio checking hospitals. Nothing. She had vanished completely, taking only her clothes and our family savings account. Dad never dated again. Not once. He threw himself into work, taking on extra contracts, working 16-hour days. I learned later he was trying to outrun the pain, but back then, I just knew he came home exhausted every night, his hands cracked and bleeding from concrete work. He'd help me with homework, make dinner from whatever was in the freezer, and we'd watch baseball together until I fell asleep on the couch. For months, I waited by our living room window every afternoon, convinced Mom would pull into our driveway with some explanation that would make everything okay. She'd hug me and say she missed me terribly, that whatever adventure she'd been on was finished. But seasons changed, years passed, and that window only showed me neighborhood kids playing with their complete families. Now here she stood 15 years later, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Her skin was smooth and tan, her nails perfectly manicured, her clothes obviously expensive. Behind her stood a man in his 40s with silver hair and confident posture, clearly successful. The 3 children looked nervous and confused, staying close to their mother like scared puppies. "Patricia." I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, sweetie, look how handsome you've grown," she said, reaching out to touch my face. I stepped back instinctively. Her smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "This is my husband, Marcus Davidson, and these are your half-siblings. Sophia is 14, and the twins Jason and Emma are 12. Marcus extended his hand with a practiced smile. "Alan, I've heard so much about you. Patricia talks about you constantly." The lie rolled off his tongue smoothly, but I caught Patricia's quick glance, warning him to be careful. "Really?" I asked, looking directly at my mother. "Funny, because I haven't heard from either of you in 15 years. Patricia's face flushed slightly. "Oh, honey, I tried to reach out so many times. Your father blocked my calls, returned my letters. He was so angry about our separation. I didn't want to put you in the middle of our adult problems." Another lie. Dad had kept the same phone number all these years, hoping she'd call. He checked the mail religiously, and I'd seen him save every piece of correspondence just in case something came from her. She'd never tried to contact us. "Mom left when I was 10, I explained to the confused children. "On Christmas morning." Sophia's eyes widened. "Mom, you never told us that." "It's complicated, sweetheart," Patricia said quickly. "Grown-up relationships are complicated." She turned back to me, her expression shifting to something that looked practiced, rehearsed. "Alan, I know this is overwhelming, but we need to discuss your father's estate. I've been researching the legal situation, and since Frank and I never formally divorced, I have certain rights as his surviving spouse." The words hit me like ice water. "You what?" Marcus stepped closer, his businessman facade slipping into something harder. "Patricia never filed divorce papers. She was too heartbroken, too hurt by Frank's treatment of her. That makes her legally entitled to spousal inheritance rights under Ohio law. I stared at them both, my mind reeling. You abandoned us? You left a 10-year-old child and never looked back. Now you want Dad's money? It's not just about money, Patricia said, her voice taking on a wounded tone that I remembered from childhood arguments. It's about making sure all the children are provided for. Your father built a good life, and these kids deserve their share of their stepfather's legacy. The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost admired it. Almost. But I'd learned to see through performances during my teenage years when I desperately wanted to believe every commercial that promised a product could bring families together when I'd hoped every knock at the door might be her returning. Frank wasn't their stepfather, I said coldly. He was my father. The man who raised me alone for 15 years while you played house with your new family? Patricia pulled legal documents from her designer purse with the efficiency of someone who'd been planning this moment. I've consulted with attorneys in California. Since we were never legally divorced, I'm entitled to 50% of everything Frank owned. The house, the business, all of it. I took the papers with shaking hands, scanning the legal terminology that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. But one thing was clear: they were serious. This wasn't just a surprise visit or an attempt at reconciliation. This was a calculated legal assault on everything my father had built for me. You can't be serious, I whispered. Deadly serious. Marcus said, his mask completely off now. We've already filed preliminary paperwork with the probate court. Patricia's rights as Frank's widow supersede any will he might have written. The rain kept falling around us, but I barely felt it anymore. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's nightmare. My father had been buried 3 days ago, and before his grave was even properly settled, the woman who destroyed our family was back to finish the job. Dorothy Walsh had been my father's attorney for 12 years, and her office reflected the same no-nonsense approach that had made Dad trust her completely. Gray hair pulled back, severely wire-rimmed glasses, and a handshake that could crack walnuts. She'd handled all of Dad's business contracts and had been the one to call me when he collapsed at the construction site. Alan, I'm going to give it to you straight, she said, spreading documents across her mahogany desk. Your father's will is crystal clear. Everything goes to you. The construction business is valued at approximately $1.2 million. The family home is worth $800,000, and his personal accounts total just over $400,000. $2.4 million. I'd known Dad had done well for himself, but seeing the numbers in black and white was staggering. He'd built an empire from nothing, working 18-hour days, sacrificing his own comfort to ensure I'd never want for anything. But Dorothy continued, her expression darkening. Patricia's claim has some legal merit. Ohio is a spousal inheritance state, which means surviving spouses have certain rights, regardless of what a will says. Since they were never legally divorced, she could potentially claim up to 50%. My stomach dropped. So she could actually win. Her legal position has weaknesses, Dorothy explained, pulling out a thick folder. Abandonment is a factor Ohio courts consider seriously. I've documented everything. School records showing your behavioral changes after she left, testimony from neighbors who witnessed her departure, financial records proving your father supported you alone for 15 years. She handed me a manila envelope. Your father gave me this 6 months ago. He said Patricia had been researching him online, looking into his business success. He was worried she might come back if something happened to him. Inside were printed screenshots of social media searches, LinkedIn profile views, and even property records requests. Patricia had been monitoring Dad's life for at least a year before his death, tracking his financial growth like a predator stalking prey. She's been planning this, I said, my anger building. This whole grieving widow act is complete bullshit. Language, but yes, Dorothy agreed. Frank was no fool. He documented everything once he realized she was sniffing around. The door opened and Patricia swept in without knocking Marcus close behind. She'd changed into a black dress that probably cost more than Dad's monthly grocery budget, playing the part of the devastated widow. "Dorothy, thank you for seeing him," she said with practiced grief. "I hope we can resolve this amicably for Alan's sake." Dorothy's expression could have frozen lava. "Mrs. Miller, you have no appointment. This is a private meeting with my client." "Frank was my husband," Patricia said, settling into a chair without invitation. "I have every right to be involved in estate planning." "Frank was your husband 15 years ago," I said. "You forfeited any rights when you abandoned your family." Marcus leaned forward, his businessman persona back in place. "Abandonment is a strong word, Alan. Patricia was escaping an emotionally abusive situation. She was protecting herself, and by extension protecting you from further trauma. The lie was so outrageous, I actually laughed. Abusive. My father was the gentlest man who ever lived. He coached my Little League team, taught me to build birdhouses, read me bedtime stories until I was 13 because I was afraid of nightmares about you never coming home. Frank had a temper," Patricia said quietly, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. "He controlled the finances, isolated me from my friends, made me feel worthless. I had to leave to save my sanity." "That's fascinating," Dorothy interrupted, "because I have bank records showing Frank deposited his paychecks into joint accounts that Patricia emptied before she left. I also have testimony from 6 neighbors who described Frank as devoted and Patricia as absent even before she officially left." Patricia's composure cracked slightly. "People don't always see what happens behind closed doors." "You're right," I said, standing up. "They don't see a 10-year-old boy crying himself to sleep every night for 2 years, wondering what he did wrong to make his mother disappear. They don't see a father working himself into exhaustion because he's afraid to be home alone with his thoughts." Marcus pulled out his own legal documents. "Emotional appeals aside, we're prepared to file a formal claim for Patricia's spousal inheritance rights, 50% of the estate as provided by Ohio law." Dorothy examined the papers with the expression of someone handling garbage. "These are preliminary filings, not actual legal claims. You're threatening litigation without proper standing. We have an attorney in California who specializes in complex inheritance cases," Marcus said smoothly. "Patricia's rights are clear-cut. Frank never filed for divorce, never legally dissolved their marriage. She's his widow, entitled to her share." "She's a deserter who abandoned her child," Dorothy shot back. "Ohio courts take abandonment very seriously in inheritance cases." Patricia stood up dramatically, her performance reaching new heights. "I never abandoned my child. I was forced to leave by Frank's emotional abuse. I've spent 15 years healing from the trauma of that marriage, and now I'm simply claiming what's legally mine." "What's legally yours?" I repeated incredulously. "You mean what Dad earned while raising me alone? What he built while you were off playing happy family with your new husband? Alan, these children are your siblings," Patricia said, gesturing toward the door where her kids waited in the hallway. "They deserve security education opportunity. Frank's success should benefit all of his family, not just you." The manipulation was masterful. She'd positioned herself as the protective mother, fighting for her children's future, while painting me as the selfish son hoarding wealth. But I'd learned to recognize manipulation from years of wondering if I'd somehow driven my mother away. "Those children have a father," I said coldly. "A living father who should be providing for them." Marcus's confident expression flickered. "My business has faced some challenges recently. Real estate markets are volatile." Dorothy seized on the admission. "So this is about your financial problems, not Patricia's supposed inheritance rights." "This is about fairness," Patricia said, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. Dorothy pulled out another document. "Alan, there's something else. Your father mentioned a safety deposit box at First National Bank. He said it contained insurance against Patricia's return. The bank requires a court order for access, but it might contain additional evidence. Patricia went pale. What kind of evidence? The kind that proves Frank knew exactly what you were planning, Dorothy said with satisfaction. Marcus stood abruptly. We're prepared to file our claim tomorrow morning. Patricia is entitled to 50% of Frank's estate as his surviving spouse. No amount of emotional manipulation will change that legal fact. File away, Dorothy said calmly. But understand that we'll fight this with everything we have. And when we're done exposing Patricia's true motivations, she'll be lucky to leave Ohio without facing criminal charges for fraud. Patricia's mask finally slipped completely. Criminal charges for claiming what's rightfully mine? For abandoning a child and returning 15 years later to steal from his father's grave, Dorothy replied coldly. As they left, Patricia turned back one last time. Alan, I'm your mother. I love you. I just want what's fair for our family. But I saw through the performance now. This wasn't about love or family or fairness. This was about money, pure and simple. And I was going to fight for every penny of what my father had earned through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. The real battle was just beginning. Patricia didn't waste time. Within hours of leaving Dorothy's office, she'd checked into the Marriott downtown and begun what could only be described as a propaganda campaign. She understood that inheritance battles aren't won just in courtrooms. They're won in the court of public opinion, especially in a tight-knit community like ours. I first noticed something was wrong when Mrs. Henderson from next door knocked on my door with a casserole and a concerned expression. She'd known our family since I was born, had watched Dad struggle through single parenthood, had been there when I graduated high school, and Dad cried with pride. Alan, honey, she said carefully. I ran into your mother at the grocery store this morning. She looks wonderful, doesn't she? She told me she's been trying to reconnect with you for years, but there was some misunderstanding that kept her away. My blood ran cold. What exactly did she tell you? Well, she said she'd been in therapy working through some difficult issues from her marriage to your father. She mentioned that Frank had some anger problems that made it unsafe for her to come home, but now that he's passed, she wants to rebuild your relationship. The lie was so smooth, so believable, that I almost doubted my own memories for a moment. Patricia had always been skilled at rewriting history, making herself the victim in every scenario. Mrs. Henderson she left on Christmas morning when I was 10 years old. She emptied our bank account and disappeared without a trace. Dad never heard from her once in 15 years. Mrs. Henderson's face clouded with confusion. But dear, that's not what she said. She showed me pictures of letters she wrote that were never answered, cards she sent that were returned. She seemed so heartbroken about the whole situation. Fake letters, staged photographs. Patricia was covering her tracks with manufactured evidence, creating a narrative where she was the wronged party, desperate to return to her family. I realized with growing horror that she'd probably been planning this character assassination for months. My phone rang. Tyler Martinez, my best friend since high school, and now a paralegal at Brennan and Associates downtown. His voice was tight with worry. Alan, man, I've been doing some research on your mom's situation. You need to sit down. I'm already sitting. What did you find? Patricia Chen, that's her married name now, has done this before. Twice. I found court records from Nevada and Oregon. She married a contractor named Robert Walsh in Nevada. In 1998 had a daughter, then disappeared in 2001 when his business took off. Filed for spousal support 3 years later, claiming abandonment and abuse. My hands started shaking. What happened? She got a settlement of $90,000. Then she married a restaurant owner named David Chen in Oregon. In 2003, had 2 kids, vanished again in 2006. Same pattern. Waited for him to succeed, then came back, with lawyers claiming he'd driven her away. So this is her business model, I said, pieces clicking into place. Find struggling men, marry them, disappear when things get tough, then return when they've built something valuable. Gets worse, Tyler continued. I found her social media accounts. She's been researching your dad for over a year. Property values, business licenses, obituaries of his competitors to track market share. This was completely premeditated. I hung up and immediately called Dorothy. She listened to Tyler's research with the grim satisfaction of a prosecutor building a case. This changes everything, she said. Pattern evidence is admissible in inheritance disputes. If we can prove she's a serial abandoner who targets successful men, her credibility evaporates. But Patricia was moving fast. By evening, she'd visited Cornerstone Baptist Church, where Dad had been a member for 20 years. Pastor Williams called me personally. Alan, son, I had the most disturbing conversation with your mother today. She's carrying tremendous guilt about leaving you and Frank, but she explained the circumstances that forced her departure. Sometimes we men don't realize how our anger affects the women in our lives. Pastor Williams, what did she tell you? She described Frank's drinking problem, his violent outbursts, his threats to take you away if she ever left. She said she was protecting you by leaving, hoping Frank would get help and become the father you deserved. Another complete fabrication. Dad had barely touched alcohol after Mom left, too afraid of losing control and failing me. He'd never raised his voice to me, let alone been violent. But Patricia's lies were carefully crafted to exploit people's assumptions about domestic abuse, making anyone who questioned her story look insensitive. Pastor Dad never drank except for a beer while watching baseball. He never hurt anyone in his life. Mom cleaned out our bank accounts and disappeared without explanation. Now, son trauma affects people differently. Sometimes women feel they can't speak directly about abuse. Your mother seemed genuinely traumatized by her memories of that time. Patricia was brilliant, I had to admit. She'd chosen the one explanation that would make people reluctant to challenge her story. Who wants to call an abuse victim a liar? Who wants to question a woman's account of domestic violence? She'd weaponized society's justified concern for women's safety to cover her own criminal selfishness. The next morning brought worse news. Marcus had been busy too. He'd filed a formal inheritance claim in probate court, accompanied by an emergency petition to freeze all of Dad's assets pending resolution. That meant I couldn't access the business accounts, couldn't make payroll for Dad's 12 employees, couldn't pay the bills keeping Miller Construction operational. Dorothy called an emergency meeting. They're trying to force you into a quick settlement by strangling the business. If Miller Construction goes under, the company's value drops, significantly reducing the total estate value. So they're destroying Dad's legacy to steal what's left. Exactly. It's a scorched earth strategy. They'd rather have 50% of $1 million than fight for 50% of $2.4 million. I thought about Dad's employees, guys like Tommy Rodriguez, who'd worked construction for Dad for 8 years, supporting 3 kids and a disabled wife. Carlos Williams, fresh out of high school, learning a trade that could support him for life. These weren't just employees. They were Dad's extended family men he'd personally trained and mentored. That evening, Patricia made her boldest move yet. She knocked on my apartment door with Sophia in tow, her 14-year-old daughter looking confused and uncomfortable. Patricia had dressed the girl in a simple sweater and jeans, clearly aiming for a sympathetic appearance. "Alan, please, can we just talk family to family?" Against my better judgment, I let them in. Sophia immediately went to my bookshelf, examining my collection of science fiction novels with genuine interest. "You like Isaac Asimov?" she asked. "I love the Foundation series." For a moment, I glimpsed what having a younger sibling might have been like. Sophia seemed intelligent, thoughtful, nothing like the manipulative woman who'd raised her. I felt a stab of sympathy for these kids who were being dragged into their mother's schemes. "Sophia, honey, why don't you look around while Alan and I talk?" Patricia suggested. She pulled out her phone and showed me photographs, old pictures of her and Dad from their early marriage looking young and happy, pictures of me as a baby that I'd never seen before, pictures of her pregnant, glowing with maternal joy. I loved your father, Alan. I loved you. But I was 22 when you were born, barely more than a child myself. Frank worked all the time I was alone with a crying baby trapped in a house with no friends, no family nearby. I felt like I was drowning. For just a moment, the manipulation worked. I could see the scared young woman. She'd been overwhelmed by responsibilities she wasn't ready for. Then I remembered 10-year-old me finding that note on Christmas morning. You could have asked for help. You could have talked to Dad, gotten counseling, called your sister. You didn't have to disappear. I tried to talk to Frank, but he just worked longer hours. I was having panic attacks, couldn't sleep, couldn't function. The doctor prescribed antidepressants, but Frank said I was just being dramatic. He didn't understand depression back then. Another carefully crafted half-truth. Dad had mentioned Mom's struggles with what we'd now call postpartum depression, but he'd been supportive, worried, desperate to help. She was rewriting their history to justify her abandonment. So you left your sick child with his father and disappeared for 15 years. I left my child with a capable parent while I got the help I needed. I always planned to come back, but Frank made it clear I wasn't welcome. Every time I tried to reach out, he blocked my attempts. Sophia looked up from the books. Mom, you never told me you tried to contact him. Patricia's expression flickered with annoyance. It's complicated, sweetheart. Adult relationships are complicated. I knelt down to Sophia's eye level. Sophia, I want you to understand something. Your mother left on Christmas morning when I was 10 years old. She never called, never wrote, never visited. My dad kept the same phone number and address for 15 years, hoping she'd contact us. She didn't abandon me to get help. She abandoned me to start a new life without the inconvenience of her first child. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Mom, is that true? Patricia's mask slipped completely. Sophia, don't listen to him. He's angry and confused. He doesn't understand what happened between his father and me. I understand perfectly, I said, standing up. You're a serial abandoner who targets men, marries them, waits for them to succeed, then comes back with lawyers to steal what they've built. Patricia grabbed Sophia's hand roughly. We should go. But as they reached the door, Sophia turned back. Alan, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Mom told us our stepfather had kept her away from you. After they left, I sat in my apartment, staring at the photos Patricia had left behind. In them, she looked genuinely happy, genuinely loving. That was the most disturbing part. She wasn't a cartoon villain. She was a deeply selfish person, capable of momentary, genuine emotion, which made her manipulation even more effective. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop telling lies about Patricia, or you'll regret it. Some accidents can't be prevented. Marcus was escalating. The inheritance dispute was becoming something much more dangerous. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in Judge Henrietta Morrison's courtroom, watching Patricia perform the role of her lifetime. She'd hired Jonathan Blake, a slick inheritance attorney from Columbus, who specialized in complex spousal claims. His reputation preceded him: $300 haircuts, Italian suits, and a win rate that justified his astronomical fees. Patricia had chosen her costume carefully, a simple black dress, minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a modest bun. She looked like a grieving widow seeking justice, not a calculating manipulator pursuing money. Beside her, Marcus sat in an expensive suit playing the supportive husband role to perfection. Judge Morrison was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd built her reputation on fair but tough rulings, and I could only hope she'd see through Patricia's performance. Mrs. Davidson. Blake began using Patricia's current married name. Please tell the court about your marriage to Frank Miller. Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue before speaking. Frank and I married in 1997. We were both young, full of hope and dreams. Alan was born the following year, and for a while we were happy. Her voice carried just the right amount of wistful sadness, as if she were remembering a beautiful dream that turned into a nightmare. When did things begin to change? Frank started working longer hours, coming home angry and exhausted. He began drinking not heavily at first, but enough that his personality changed. He became controlling, demanding to know where I went, who I talked to. He managed all our finances, gave me an allowance like I was a child. Every word was a carefully constructed lie. Blake was good. He'd coached her to avoid outright defamation while painting Dad as a controlling alcoholic. Did this behavior escalate? Patricia's voice broke slightly. After Alan turned 9, Frank's temper got worse. He never hit me, but he'd punch walls, throw things, scream until the neighbors called the police. I was terrified of what might happen if I stayed. In the gallery behind me, I heard murmurs of sympathy. Patricia was winning the room with her performance, and Blake was building a narrative that would make her abandonment look like self-preservation. Why didn't you take Alan with you when you left? I wanted to, Patricia said, tears flowing now. But Frank threatened to disappear with him if I tried. He said no court would give custody to a woman with no job, no money, no family support. I thought if I left alone, got my life together, I could come back for Alan when I was stronger. And did you attempt to maintain contact with your son? Patricia nodded emphatically. I called constantly, but Frank had changed the number. I wrote letters that came back marked return to sender. I even hired a private investigator to check on Alan's welfare, but Frank had moved and left no forwarding address. More lies delivered with Academy Award level conviction. Blake was constructing an alternate reality where Patricia was the victim of an abusive husband who'd stolen her child and hidden him from her desperate attempts to reconnect. What was your financial situation when you left? I had nothing, Patricia said. Frank controlled every penny. When I left, I took only enough to survive until I could find work. I was 27 years old with no job experience, no education beyond high school, no family to help me. Blake nodded sympathetically. And during your separation from Mr. Miller, did you ever formally file for divorce? I couldn't afford an attorney, and I kept hoping we could reconcile. I thought if Frank got help for his drinking, we might save our marriage for Alan's sake. Dorothy stood for cross-examination, and I could see she was barely containing her rage at Patricia's lies. Mrs. Davidson, you testified that you took only enough money to survive when you left. Are you familiar with these bank records? Dorothy presented evidence showing Patricia had emptied 3 accounts totaling $47,000, Dad's entire life savings at the time. Patricia's confidence wavered slightly. I took what I needed to survive until I could establish myself. $47,000 to survive. Were you planning to survive in luxury hotels? I was scared, not thinking clearly. I took more than I should have. Dorothy pulled out more documents. These credit card statements show purchases of jewelry, clothing, and a first-class plane ticket to California. Does that sound like survival spending? Patricia's lawyer objected, but Judge Morrison overruled him. She was watching Patricia's testimony with growing skepticism. Mrs. Davidson, you claim you hired a private investigator to check on Alan's welfare. Can you provide receipts or a name for this investigator? Patricia fumbled. It was so long ago I don't remember his name. You don't remember the name of the private investigator you hired to find your missing child? I was traumatized, not thinking clearly. Dorothy moved in for the kill. Mrs. Davidson, are you familiar with Robert Walsh of Nevada and David Chen of Oregon? Patricia went pale. Blake started to object, but Dorothy was ready. Your Honor, this goes directly to the witness's credibility and pattern of behavior. Judge Morrison nodded. I'll allow it. Mrs. Davidson, you were married to Robert Walsh from 1998 to 2001, correct? Yes, but that has nothing to do with this case. You left Mr. Walsh and your daughter Sarah in 2001, returned 3 years later to claim spousal support, citing abuse and abandonment, correct? Patricia's composure was cracking. That situation was completely different. Different how you married Mr. Chen in 2003, had twins left in 2006, then returned to claim assets after his restaurant business succeeded. Blake was objecting frantically now, but Dorothy had established her pattern. Patricia was a serial abandoner who used false abuse claims to justify her departures and financial demands. But Patricia wasn't finished. As Dorothy returned to her seat, Patricia suddenly stood up, her carefully maintained composure finally snapping. "That's my husband's money," she screamed at me across the courtroom. "Nobody cares about you, you selfish brat. I sacrificed my youth for that family, and I deserve what Frank owed me." The outburst was explosive, genuine, and completely devastating to her case. Blake tried to calm her down, but the damage was done. Every person in that courtroom had just seen Patricia's true nature. Not a grieving abuse victim, but a furious woman angry about missing out on money she felt entitled to. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. "Mrs. Davidson, you will control yourself in my courtroom or be held in contempt." But Patricia was past caring about appearances. 15 years I waited for Frank to succeed. And now this ungrateful child thinks he deserves everything I gave birth to him. I raised him for 10 years. That money is mine. "Mrs. Davidson," Judge Morrison said coldly, "your true feelings about your son are now clear to this court." The judge called a recess, but Patricia's mask had completely dissolved. In the hallway, she continued ranting to Marcus about how ungrateful I was, how she'd wasted her best years on Frank, how she deserved compensation for her suffering. I realized that Dorothy had been playing the long game, letting Patricia build her victim narrative before systematically destroying it. The courtroom outburst wasn't planned, but it was the inevitable result of sustained pressure on someone whose entire case was built on lies. When we reconvened, Judge Morrison's expression had hardened considerably. Patricia's credibility was destroyed, her pattern of behavior exposed, and her true motivations revealed. But I knew the legal battle was far from over. Patricia might have lost this round, but desperate people do desperate things, and she still had Marcus whispering in her ear about what they stood to lose. Judge Morrison's voice cut through the courthouse tension like a blade. "Mrs. Davidson, your outburst has revealed more about your character and motivations than hours of testimony could. This court is deeply troubled by what it has witnessed." Patricia sat trembling in her chair, her lawyer Blake frantically scribbling notes, probably calculating how to salvage a case that had just imploded spectacularly. Marcus leaned forward, his businessman's confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. "However," Judge Morrison continued, "I am ordering a 48-hour recess to allow both parties to consider their positions. I am also mandating a court-appointed psychological evaluation for Mrs. Davidson to assess her mental state and fitness as a claimant in this matter." Blake shot to his feet. "Your Honor, that's highly irregular. My client's emotional response to years of separation from her son hardly warrants psychological evaluation. Your client's emotional response revealed a pattern of calculated manipulation, followed by explosive rage when challenged," Judge Morrison replied coldly. "This court has serious concerns about her credibility and mental stability." As the courtroom cleared, Dorothy and I huddled in the hallway to discuss strategy. But before we could speak privately, Patricia approached us, her designer mask completely off now. "Alan, please," she said, but her voice carried an edge of desperation, rather than maternal love. "Let's settle this quietly. You give me half of what Frank left and I'll disappear again. You'll never have to see me." "You mean like you disappeared before then came back, when it was financially convenient?" Her expression hardened. "Fine. Be stubborn. But remember, you're not just fighting me anymore. Marcus has resources you can't imagine, connections, influence. This can get very ugly for you." Marcus stepped closer, his friendly businessman act completely gone. "Alan, your father's death was very sudden, wasn't it? Heart attack at 52, perfectly healthy man. These things happen, but sometimes they need a little help." The implication hit me like ice water. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm pointing out that accidents happen to people who don't know when to compromise." Dorothy immediately stepped between us. "Mr. Davidson, did you just threaten my client in front of witnesses?" Marcus smiled coldly. "I simply observed that life is unpredictable. Alan should be careful." As they walked away, I realized the inheritance dispute had evolved into something much more dangerous. Dorothy was already on her phone calling courthouse security to report Marcus's veiled threat. That evening, Tyler called with urgent news. His investigation into Marcus had uncovered disturbing information. Allen man Marcus Davidson is in serious financial trouble. His real estate development company is facing foreclosure on 3 major projects. He owes investors over $2 million, and there are rumors about mob connections to some of his funding sources. How does that connect to Dad? I think Marcus killed your father. He needed Patricia's inheritance claim to work, but as long as Frank was alive, there was no inheritance to claim. A healthy 52-year-old man doesn't just drop dead from a heart attack. Nuram, the pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. Marcus hadn't just married Patricia for love. He'd married her as part of a long-term investment strategy. Research Dad's success, marry the ex-wife, wait for the right opportunity, then collect the insurance payout. Tyler, we need to call the police. Already did. Detective Jake Rodriguez from Homicide is reopening your father's death investigation. He wants to meet with you tomorrow morning. But first I had to confront Patricia one more time. I found her at the hotel bar drinking wine alone while her children played in the lobby. She looked older than she had a week ago, the stress of her crumbling scheme aging her in real time. Patricia, I know Marcus killed Dad. She nearly dropped her wine glass. What are you talking about? Your husband is bankrupt. He needed Dad's inheritance to save his business, but as long as Dad was alive, there was nothing to inherit. So he eliminated the obstacle. Patricia's face went white. Marcus he couldn't. Look at the timeline. Marcus researches Dad for months, then marries you. Then Dad conveniently dies, just when Marcus's debts come due. You're not just a gold digger, Patricia. You're an accessory to murder. For the first time since she'd returned, Patricia looked genuinely terrified. Alan, you don't understand. Marcus said he just wanted to provide for the children, that Frank owed me something for the years I sacrificed. You didn't sacrifice anything. You abandoned your family and started a new one. But Marcus saw an opportunity to exploit your selfishness for his own purposes. Patricia was shaking now. He showed me Frank's business records proof of how successful he'd become. He said I deserved half of what Frank had built because I'd been his wife first. And when did he first contact you about Dad? Last year after David and I divorced. Marcus said he'd been researching my background for a business deal found out about my marriage to Frank. He seemed so understanding, so sympathetic about what I'd been through. The picture became clearer. Marcus had targeted Patricia specifically because of her connection to Dad, manipulated her insecurities and greed to create a willing accomplice in his scheme. She wasn't the mastermind. She was another victim of Marcus's manipulation, albeit a willing one. Patricia, Marcus used you. He married you to get access to Dad's inheritance, then killed Dad to make the inheritance available. Tears started flowing down her cheeks, but for the first time they seemed genuine. I never wanted Frank to die. I just wanted what was fair, what I deserved for the years I gave him. You gave him 10 years, then abandoned your child on Christmas morning. What you deserved was nothing. Patricia sobbed openly now. I know I was selfish. I know I hurt you and Frank terribly, but I was young and scared and stupid, and I've regretted it every day since. Have you? Or did you just regret it when you realized how much money you'd given up? She couldn't answer because we both knew the truth. Patricia's regret wasn't about the emotional damage she'd caused, it was about the financial opportunity she'd missed. But even through my anger, I felt a stab of pity for her. She was a weak, selfish woman who'd been manipulated by someone even more calculating than she was. Marcus had used her abandonment guilt and financial desperation to turn her into an accessory to murder. Patricia, if you help me prove Marcus killed Dad, I'll make sure you're not charged as an accomplice. She looked up through her tears. How can I help? Tell Detective Rodriguez everything. When Marcus first contacted you, what he said about Dad's business, how he convinced you to claim inheritance rights, everything. Patricia nodded slowly. Okay, but Alan, what about the children? They don't deserve to suffer for Marcus's crimes or my mistakes. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of actual maternal concern from her. Whatever else she was, she did care about her children's welfare. The kids will be okay, I said. But Marcus is going to prison, and you're going to have to live with the consequences of your choices. As I left the hotel, I realized that Patricia was both victim and villain in this story. She'd abandoned her family out of selfishness, then been manipulated into becoming an accessory to murder. Justice would be served, but it would be complicated, messy, and painful for everyone involved. The next morning, Detective Rodriguez laid out the evidence that would destroy Marcus Davidson and finally give my father the justice he deserved. Detective Jake Rodriguez had the weathered look of a man who'd seen too much human evil, but his eyes sharpened with interest as I laid out our suspicions about Dad's death. His downtown office was cramped and cluttered case files stacked on every surface, but Rodriguez had a reputation for tenacity that made hardened criminals confess just to make him stop digging. Alan, I'll be straight with you. Your father's death looked natural. 52-year-old heart attack at a construction site, no obvious signs of foul play. But after your call yesterday, I pulled the file and started asking questions. He spread photographs across his desk, crime scene shots from Dad's final job site medical examiner reports, witness statements from his crew. Everything looked routine until Rodriguez pointed to a detail I'd missed. Your father collapsed at 3:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. His crew was at lunch. The site was empty except for Frank. But here's what's interesting. Security cameras from the adjacent building show a silver BMW leaving the construction site at 3:05 p.m. My heart started racing. Marcus drives a silver BMW. I know, I ran the plates. Marcus Davidson visited your father's job site exactly 10 minutes before Frank collapsed and died. Rodriguez pulled out another file. I also talked to Dr. Sarah Bennett, your father's cardiologist. She's been treating Frank for minor blood pressure issues for 2 years. According to her, Frank had the heart of a 30-year-old. No blockages, excellent cholesterol, regular exercise. She was shocked when she heard about his heart attack. So Dad wasn't at risk for cardiac problems, not according to his medical history. Dr. Bennett ordered additional blood tests after his death, but the funeral home had already embalmed the body. By the time we got the results, any trace evidence would have been contaminated. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. But yesterday, after your call, I contacted the coroner's office and requested a re-examination of the preserved blood samples. Guess what they found? Please tell me you found something. Traces of digitalis, a heart medication that can trigger fatal cardiac arrhythmia if given to someone who doesn't need it. Your father wasn't prescribed digitalis, but it was in his bloodstream at lethal levels. The room seemed to spin around me. Someone poisoned him. Someone who knew enough about cardiac medications to choose an undetectable method. Digitalis breaks down quickly in the body, and unless you're specifically looking for it, it appears to be natural heart failure. Rodriguez pulled out yet another file. So I started investigating Marcus Davidson more thoroughly. Turns out he's a type 1 diabetic, has been for 15 years. Guess what medication diabetics sometimes take for related cardiac complications? Digitalis. Bingo. Marcus had legal access to the exact drug that killed your father, and he was at the scene 10 minutes before Frank died. The pieces were finally coming together, but Rodriguez wasn't finished. I also discovered that Marcus has been in serious financial trouble for over a year. His real estate development company owes creditors $2.3 million. 3 of his major projects are in foreclosure, and several investors have filed lawsuits claiming fraud. So he was desperate for money. Desperate enough to kill for it. But here's where it gets really interesting. Rodriguez pulled out a manila envelope. Patricia came to see me this morning. She brought these. Inside the envelope were printouts of emails between Marcus and Patricia dating back 18 months. The correspondence told the entire story of their conspiracy laid out in black and white. The first email was from Marcus to Patricia, dated 14 months ago. Patricia, I hope you don't mind me reaching out. I'm a business associate researching the construction industry in Ohio, and I came across records of your marriage to Frank Miller. I understand you've been divorced for many years, but I'd love to discuss some business opportunities that might interest you. Patricia's response was cautious but intrigued. I'm not sure what business opportunities you're referring to. Frank and I separated years ago and I've had no contact with him since. Marcus's follow-up was masterful manipulation. I've been tracking successful contractors in the Midwest, and Frank's business has grown tremendously since your separation. Based on my research, if you were still legally married, you'd be entitled to significant spousal inheritance rights. Have you ever considered that you might have a claim to his assets? The emails continued for months, with Marcus gradually convincing Patricia that she deserved compensation for her sacrificed years, and that Frank's success was partly due to the foundation she'd helped build in their early marriage. He painted Frank as a man who'd benefited from her domestic support while she struggled alone rewriting history to justify her potential claim. This is a systematic manipulation campaign, I said, reading through the evidence. It gets worse, Rodriguez replied. Look at the emails from 2 months ago. Marcus's tone had shifted from sympathetic to urgent. Patricia, my financial situation has become critical. I need Frank's inheritance to save my business and our family's security. We can't wait for him to die naturally. He could live another 30 years, and by then my debts will have destroyed us. Patricia's response showed growing concern. Marcus, what are you suggesting? I won't be party to anything illegal. But Marcus was relentless. It's not illegal if he dies of natural causes. Heart disease runs in his family, doesn't it? A man his age working in a high-stress job, these things happen. And if something were to happen, you'd be there to claim your rightful inheritance and save our family. The final email sent 3 weeks before Dad's death was chilling. Everything is arranged, Frank's daily routine is predictable, and I've identified the perfect opportunity. After he's gone, we wait a respectful period, then file your inheritance claim. The children's future depends on this. Patricia kept all of this, I asked. She says Marcus insisted on email communication to keep their plans organized, but I think she kept the emails as insurance in case things went wrong. Smart woman, even if she's morally bankrupt. Rodriguez stood up and grabbed his jacket. Alan, I'm arresting Marcus Davidson for the premeditated murder of your father. Patricia is cooperating fully in exchange for immunity from murder charges, though she'll likely face conspiracy charges. What about the inheritance case? With Marcus in custody and Patricia's confession, Judge Morrison will throw out the inheritance claim immediately. The estate is yours free and clear. As we drove to arrest Marcus, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that Dad's killer would face justice, anger at the calculated nature of his murder, and strange pity for Patricia, whose greed had made her an easy target for Marcus's manipulation. But there was one more revelation waiting. As Rodriguez pulled into the hotel parking lot, he handed me another envelope. This came from your father's bank this morning. Remember that safety deposit box Dorothy mentioned? The court order came through. Inside were documents that would complete the picture of Dad's final months, evidence that he'd known he was in danger and had tried to protect me from beyond the grave. The safety deposit box contained my father's final gift to me, not just evidence that would convict his killer, but proof of the kind of man he'd been until the very end. Dorothy and I sat in the bank vault, reading through documents that revealed Dad's growing awareness of the danger he faced. The first item was a letter addressed to me dated just 1 month before his death. Alan, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and Patricia has returned to claim my estate. Son, I want you to know that every day since she left has been worth it because I got to watch you grow into the man I'm proud to call my child. You are my legacy, not the money or the business. But I also want you to have what I've built because you earned it through 15 years of loyalty and love." The letter continued. "I've been getting threatening phone calls from a man named Marcus Davidson. He claims to be married to Patricia and says I owe her compensation for our early marriage. I've recorded these calls and hired a private investigator to research his background. Alan, I believe this man is dangerous, and I'm taking precautions to protect both of us." Attached to the letter were audio recordings of Marcus's phone calls to Dad threats disguised as business negotiations. In one particularly chilling recording, Marcus's voice was calm but menacing. "Frank, Patricia deserves half of what you've built. If something happens to you, she'll get it anyway as your widow. Wouldn't it be easier to settle this while you're alive?" Dad's response showed the quiet courage I'd always admired. "Marcus, Patricia abandoned her family 15 years ago. She has no claim to anything I've earned since then. If you or she continue threatening me or my son, I'll involve the police." Marcus's final call, recorded just days before Dad's death, was a direct threat. "Frank, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Sometimes men your age have heart attacks. Stress is a killer, especially for someone carrying the burden of stolen wealth." But Dad had been prepared. The safety deposit box also contained a newer version of his will, dated 1 week before his death, leaving everything specifically to me with the notation, "Because Alan earned this inheritance through loyalty, love, and sacrifice. Because he never abandoned his family when things became difficult." Dorothy smiled through her tears as she read the will. "Your father knew exactly what he was doing. This will supersedes anything Patricia could claim, even if she had valid spousal rights." Detective Rodriguez arrived with news that would complete our victory. Marcus Davidson is in custody charged with first-degree murder. We found digitalis tablets in his hotel room along with detailed notes about Frank's daily routine and work schedule. He planned this murder meticulously. What about Patricia? She's agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy charges in exchange for a reduced sentence of 18 months probation and community service. Her cooperation was essential for convicting Marcus, and she genuinely seems remorseful about her role in Frank's death. The trial moved swiftly once Marcus's lawyer realized the overwhelming evidence against him. The recorded threats, the digitalis evidence, Patricia's testimony about their conspiracy, and the timeline placing Marcus at Dad's job site minutes before his death created an airtight case. Judge Morrison, the same woman who'd presided over the inheritance hearing, delivered Marcus's sentence with appropriate gravity. "Mr. Davidson, you committed the most calculated and cowardly murder this court has seen. You manipulated a vulnerable woman's greed to gain access to an innocent man, then murdered him for financial gain. This court sentences you to life in prison without possibility of parole." Patricia stood in the gallery, tears streaming down her face as she watched her husband disappear into the criminal justice system. Her children sat beside her, confused and traumatized by the revelation that their stepfather was a killer. After the sentencing, Patricia approached me in the courthouse hallway. She looked 10 years older than when she'd first appeared at Dad's funeral, the stress and guilt aging her dramatically. "Alan, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. I abandoned you, conspired against Frank's memory, and helped a murderer target your father. I'll live with that guilt for the rest of my life. Patricia, you made terrible choices, but Marcus manipulated your worst impulses. You were as much his victim as Dad was." "No," she said firmly. "I was a willing participant. I let greed and selfishness override any maternal instincts I should have had. Those are my choices, my responsibility." It was the first time I'd heard Patricia take full accountability for her actions without making excuses or blaming others. The experience had broken her, but it had also forced her to confront the person she'd become. What will happen to the children? Sophia, Jason, and Emma will come live with my sister in California while I serve my probation and complete community service. I'm working 2 jobs now trying to support them and pay back the legal fees Marcus's crimes generated. I made a decision that would have made Dad proud. Patricia, I'm setting up college funds for all three children. They shouldn't suffer for their parents' mistakes. Patricia broke down completely. Why would you do that after everything I've done? Because those kids are innocent. Because Dad would want them to have opportunities. And because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but it means choosing to break the cycle of hurt. 6 months later, I stood in Dad's office at Miller Construction, now fully mine, but managed in his memory. The business was thriving under my leadership, and I'd promoted Tyler to business manager. We'd established the Frank Miller Memorial Scholarship for children of single parents pursuing trade education. Patricia had moved to California to be near her children, working as a hotel housekeeper and attending counseling sessions to understand her patterns of abandonment and manipulation. She sent cards on holidays now, not asking for anything, just acknowledging the relationship we were slowly, carefully rebuilding. Sophia had written me letters describing her life in California, her academic achievements, and her plans to study engineering in college. She was nothing like her mother, thoughtful, responsible, genuinely appreciative of the educational opportunities I'd provided. The most surprising development came on the first anniversary of Dad's death. Patricia returned to Ohio not for money or legal proceedings, but to visit Dad's grave. I found her there kneeling beside his headstone, speaking quietly. I'm telling him about the children's progress in school, about the counseling that's helping me understand why I've made such destructive choices. I'm asking for his forgiveness, though I know I don't deserve it. We stood together in comfortable silence, two people connected by lost mistakes and the slow work of healing. Patricia would never be the mother I'd needed as a child, but she was trying to become a person worthy of redemption. Alan, she said as we walked away from the cemetery, your father raised an extraordinary man. You could have destroyed me in court, taken revenge for all the pain I caused, but instead you chose mercy. That's Frank's legacy living in you. 2 years later, the inheritance battle felt like ancient history. Miller Construction had expanded into green building technology, honoring Dad's belief in innovation and progress. The company employed 30 people, now providing good jobs and health care for families throughout our community. I'd also started dating Sarah Chen, a pediatric nurse, who understood both loss and healing. She'd lost her own father young and appreciated the complex dynamics of rebuilding fractured families. Patricia had completed her probation and was working as a patient advocate at a nonprofit helping families navigate medical crises. She'd found work that used her painful experiences to help others, transforming her patterns of selfishness into genuine service. The children were thriving. Sophia had been accepted to Stanford University's engineering program with academic scholarships that, combined with her college fund, would cover her entire education. The twins were excelling in high school, both planning careers in education and social work. Most importantly, I'd learned that family isn't defined by blood alone, but by who stays when things get difficult, who fights for you when you can't fight for yourself, and who earns the right to be in your life through consistent actions over time. Dad had been right in his final letter. Love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice made every day through sacrifice, commitment, and putting family first. Patricia had failed that test, but through consequences and hard work, she was learning to pass it with her remaining children. The money had never been the real inheritance. Dad's true legacy was teaching me that real strength comes from protecting what matters most, while having the courage to forgive those who fail us. Some people deserve second chances, but they have to earn them through genuine change, not just words or temporary remorse. Standing in my office looking at a photo of Dad and me at my high school graduation, I realized that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about accountability, growth, and the possibility that even the most broken people can choose to become better if they're willing to do the work. Family is complicated, forgiveness is hard, but love endures when it's built on truth, respect, and the daily choice to put others before yourself. That's what Dad taught me, and that's what I'll pass on to my own children someday. The inheritance battle had ended, but the real victory was learning that some things are more valuable than money, integrity, loyalty, and the courage to love people even when they've failed you, while still protecting yourself from their destructive choices. That's a lesson worth more than all the money in the world. Now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to forgive someone who deeply hurt you, even when they didn't deserve it? How do you balance protecting yourself while still leaving room for people to change and grow? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who's struggling with similar family challenges. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button to help others find it. Subscribe for more real stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding peace through difficult circumstances. And share this with anyone who might need to hear that forgiveness is possible even in the most painful situations. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, your past doesn't define your future, but your choices today determine the legacy you'll leave tomorrow. Choose love, choose truth, and choose the courage to build the family you deserve.